Hello, I'm Peg Leisegang. I have lived in Caloundra for many years. I was married here in 1947. My family moved here in 1943 and were good neighbours to Maurice and Felicity Stensen, who lived in the cottage here called Felicity Cottage. At the time that Felicity died, Maurice went back to his homeland, Israel. He gave the property, he gave the council at the time. Jack Bosang was the chairman. He offered the land and the cottage to the council for the government valuation of the land, which they accepted, with the condition that the trees were kept because Felicity had painted them in 1949. So that was a great part of my life, was friends with these couple. They were Auntie Felicity and Uncle Maurice to me. When that council took over the land, a particular councillor wanted to cut the trees down to put a car park, and I was told about this by the then town clerk, John Smith. So I started my protest, and happily, with help from a few people, we saved the trees. And they have been a delight to everybody, I'm sure. That cottage was my second home, and I suppose that I spent a great deal of time there in that cottage, because it was only over the back fence to Mum and Dad. I just feel so happy that they are remembered in this way, with Felicity Cottage gone,
yes,
and Felicity Park and Walkway.
So do you know how old the cottage was when it was built?
Well, I would say early 40s, early 1940s.
Right.
Because Felicity planted those trees, Maurice said, in 1949, and they were living in it then. So it would be early 1940s that it was built. The other painting was built by Dick Orrell, a local painter, a local builder, and my husband and I bought it in August 1952. The house was weatherboard. Some of the inside was 3-ply, some was fibro. Where Wairima Terrace comes up on it to join Oronsay Avenue, friends used to jokingly say to me, because if a truck came up Wairima Terrace and kept going, they'd go straight into your house.
And what number was it?
Number 9. When you get to 91, my friends, you've got a lot of memories.
I bet.
Some you remember, some fade away. Maurice and Felicity were caretakers in a wonderful old colonial home called Merthyr in Newfarm. It was the home of Sir Samuel Griffiths, who was, I think, one of the first premiers of Queensland in the 1800s. The house was modelled into little flatheads, and Maurice was the caretaker there. When the house was to be demolished, Maurice got a few things. Among them was the chair that had originally been Sir Samuel Griffiths. There were a few little pieces of furniture left, and that was one. When Felicity died and he was going back to Israel, he asked me if anything I wanted, and I said, I love that chair. It had been so much of my life. And so Maurice very kindly gave it to him. It had a leather covering, and it was stuffed with horsehair. This would have been the days of those days, because it is a gentleman's chair. I was correspondent for the Courier Mail and Sunday Mail and the Nambour Chronicle in the 50s. And then I gave some of the news items to a little paper called The Topic, that I don't think I have anymore. She said to me, why don't you do it yourself instead of handing it out, you know? So that started it. And she was manager of the Region Press in Brisbane. She said, you write your articles, I'll put the headings on for you and print it for you. So that's what happened. And then she sent it up on the train that came up on a Friday night. It was in the 60, 61 sort of thing. They were there for a couple of years. And but the credit quiz came and we didn't have the finance to keep going. The Nottages lived in it. I'm trying to think who lived in it first. That was in Oronsay Avenue too.
It was next door to
This is
Texas.
next door to this. That's my husband, Leisegang. That's Jack Bosang, who at that time was the Shire Chairman. And this is myself, Peg Leisegang. This is Mrs Cochran, who her father was Goodwin. Her father, Mr Goodwin, I can't remember his name, I think it was George, had a fish canning business in Pommerstone Passage, up the Pommerstone Passage. Right. And this is Mrs McBride, who was Grace Tripcony. And this was a funny one. I was trying to find who was the first child born in Caloundra, and they both claimed the title. It was the first Caloundra reunion in 1984 in August. It's George and Mary Theodore, Hazel O'Mara, these are all locals, right? His father built that house. There's where Daphne Crawn, Mrs Skipper, Kit Skipper, John Dwyer, who's the priest here now, Mrs Woodrow, whose husband had a lot to do with the golf course, Dawn Cram, Ruth Kerr, what's his name, Skipper, Eric Gray, and Vi Dawson. The Dawsons did a lot out at Moffat Beach.
That's right, they had a house on the...
and she married Eric Gray. He's on that video. June Cobb, Jill Carter, Elizabeth Wilson, Peter Wilson's wife, Lady Wilson's daughter-in-law. Oh, there you go.
And when was that taken?
I don't know. See? I don't know. Leslie's again, Johnny Page, that's Mrs Williamson was the club master, and Thelma Nichols was the assistant, and that's Mrs Williamson's son John. And I'm afraid my memory's going, isn't it?
You're doing pretty well.
And that was Walter Jennings. And Mrs Westerway. Peter Wilson said that his mother was a shareholder in P&O Lines. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds like it. And my father-in-law went to Germany in 1928 to have an operation, one of the first in Europe, on his ears, and he went over on the Oronsay, where we lived, and the next street down was the Orama, and he came back on the Orama. Isn't that coincidental?
And so the street names, that was from Lady Wilson?
Well, according to Peter,